Hi, I'm Tony Riddle, and this is the NatLifePod, a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. Big shout out to this episode's sponsor, XL Coffee. XL are renowned organic coffee producers here in the UK who have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure their coffee is mold-free and has kept its antioxidant potency. XL are waking up the world of coffee. I'm a big fan and recommend you go give them a try. Use discount code NatLifePod at checkout. Details are in the show notes. So we're rolling. We are rolling. Welcome back. It's me, Tony Riddle, your host of the NatLifePod, here to close that gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. There you go. Been rolling just over a year now since we reignited the pod. I reignited the voice. Had some great guests, had some great solos. Katerina's back on the pod. So that was the last podcast we released, a parenting epiphany, and we had great feedback from that. Also launched something else within that, was to speak to you, the audience, and see if there were any questions. And I'm doing that again. I like that formula. It works, and it feels easier when solo with a mic, because it's almost like I now am the guest in a way, and I'm being asked the question. And I rather like that. It gives me an opportunity to answer it, but perhaps, as you might have heard me before, go down rabbit holes and tangents. I've just come off a really important call, and it was with Robin and Ahau from Roots of the Gods, and we are holding the first in the UK, that is 100 human sweat lodge. So we had a big call with people that are helping facilitate within that, and for the safety of that, because a large number of people to be taken into a sweat lodge. But anyhow, and here I am now behind the mic. So there was kind of a brief communication with Simon, and I said, come on, let's go and get outside and get our feet on the grass and our feet on the earth and have the bright lights in our eyes. And I was voicing how transitioning between one thing and another was one. Like, what do we do between one experience and another? Like being on a call like that and then being in front of the mic like this. And is it the same person? You know, because we are familiar with wearing masks, aren't we? And it might be a mask in this particular situation and then be different in this situation. And I feel that I've just recently had a birthday, and I'm 49 now. So it means I'm now in my 50th start of a 940 billion kilometer navigation around the sun. And I feel that less hats, I guess it feels like I wear, let's not call it masks, let's call it hats. It feels like I have less hats because it's becoming one hat, as it were. And what helps between those transitions, like, again, it's the simple practices and the stuff that's free that I believe is then incredibly freeing. So it's quite freeing to know that we don't have to keep putting different masks on, because actually that can become quite exhausting because it's not authentically us, you know? So the less Wurzel gummage kind of hats we have to wear, the more authentically we are us, right? And the less exhausting it is then, because we are just living our truth, right? So what are those practices, I guess? And as I say, I have questions here, so some of this will just me be rambling as to what that is. But what are the practices between what helps me transition even? So before this, those that have tuned into some of the pods in the past, you'll be more familiar with the breathing practices, right? And me discussing that. And I simply have a breathing app called Breathing App. And it's a 4-6 tempo breath. And it involves just a soft, light, slow, deep inhale and an exhale. And I choose that because it helps me drop in. And especially if I've perhaps just answered the door before jumping behind here because the post office arrived at the door literally just on about to get started. So it throws in another variable and I have to drop back into being able to sit behind a mic and voice this. So 2 minutes, that takes 2 minutes. And I don't care how busy you are, right? We have 120 seconds, if you break it down that way. 2 minutes. I think it's a little nuts if we were to say we didn't have that. And I speak to breath often, and the way I now view it is using nature again as the template, right? Because is it really bookending the day? Do we use breath? I'm going to sit down and do 20 to 30 minutes of breath work in the morning. And then I've got however many hours of a day to unravel, which might be postman knocking at the door. It might be get behind the mic now. It might be jumping on a call. It might be 4 kids because I'm an unschooling parent. Does it make sense to just do breath at the beginning of the day and then at the end of the day, like bookending the day? Or in my mind, how it works for me is to think of chapters like throughout the day, punctuated in amongst the whole day, or even between what would be the knock at the door, the podcast. And again, it's just 2 minutes. And if we're breathing at a 4-6 tempo, that's simply 12 cycles of breath. And it really is enough to transition. And it really is enough for me to enter in a much more calm, crystal clear, I would say, mind, rather than what can be an upregulated, dysregulated being. So yeah, I think I for me it's practices like the breath, and again it's pulling it back to how it would look in nature, right? So how did I voice this the other day? Like no one ever got high blood pressure from not taking a high blood pressure tablet in the first place. No one got high blood pressure and upregulated heartbeat through, again, not taking meds in the first place. So that's the meds we know are then the symptom relief for that. But yeah, I do know that if I breathe at a 4-6 tempo breath, and it's a nice calm breath, so it works out at those 6 breaths per minute, I know I can lower my heart rate and blood pressure. So one could argue that the fact that I'm not breathing correctly would lead then to my heart rate and blood pressure being up. And this is the difference between working then at a symptom level and a cause level, right? So how do we breathe naturally? And it's if you look through the methods and the philosophies of breath, there is this speaking to 6 breaths per minute. And then it's how do I breathe? And there's lots of language around breath now, and it's a really popular subject. And then it's how does that observed in nature? And then we can start to bring in the people that have traveled the globe and recorded, and anthropologists, and we do start to then see that there is a nasal breathing pattern. And so it would be, again, more aligned with that lowering of heart rate and blood pressure we know is with nasal breathing because of things like nitric oxide, right? And we also know that standing out in nature for a period of time lowers heart rate and blood pressure. So that's like studies suggest 20 minutes in nature will lower heart rate and blood pressure. So that's another great tool for helping shift between wearing our perception of wearing one hat and wearing another, and actually just being that frequency. That is us. That is authentically us. That's who we are more aligned with. So if we know that being in nature for 20 minutes lowers heart rate and blood pressure, we could say that not being in nature would lead to high blood pressure and a high heart rate, right? Because again, knowing that just by going back into nature, it has that effect, then surely by not being in nature, we know that perhaps that's some of the cause, right? And can I spend more of my time in that experience? And then when we really start to unpack it, you could say that for 95% of our existence, we were a outdoor nature-based species. So now, in the position we're in today, like I am right now, right? 95% of our existence, we're known as an indoor species, an indoor generation. So 95% of our existence is actually indoors, in linear boxes with the same kind of experience for our senses. And if I know that by going out of this linear box into nature, I can lower heart rate, blood pressure, then is the symptom the very fact that I'm in this environment in the first place? And then what can I do within the environment to enable me to reach that same frequency that can just be found by being in nature? So as more natural the experience can be, and this again pulls it right back to breath work, is what I find. If I go out into nature, and studies suggest 20 minutes, if I bring that same breathwork practice in the 4-6, but in nature, I close that time down. I close that window of time down again. So it shortens the time it would take for me to reach that down regulation, that more parasympathetic state, which again is our natural state. This sympathetic state that we talk to, which is fight and flight, is meant to be for brief moments, is meant to be the acute state, but we're finding ourselves that becomes the chronic state, and the short down regulation seems to be the punctuated state. So again, bringing it back to breath rather than bookending it is to think of it throughout the day, and that's how I work with that practice and advise others to work through that practice. A simple thing in an indoor linear box might be the office, this one, and a advice that I give many is to simply have a post-it note, and it goes on your screen. So rather than think, right, I'm going to do so many rounds of breath before I go to work, and then I'm going to leave the house, and then I'm going to have this journey getting into work. I'm probably upregulated because I'm already a little bit late. Then I've got this whole journey going in that can build and build, and before you know it, you're already arriving at your desk in an upregulated mess. So it's already on the walk going, calm, walk, breath, slow, rolling through the feet, leaving a little earlier so you can slow things down by 10%. Arrive at your desk, 4-6 on the screen, or breathe, or on the hour, 1 minute. Simple cues that you can look at, then work as your coach at your desk. There you go, that you can then tap into. And then again, it's punctuated in amongst your day. And so the more familiar that can become, the more consistent it can become, the more then we can remove the post-it note or the reminder, because you're just simply normalizing that habit. And then that becomes what it would be in nature as that same breathing pattern, which is back down to this 6 breaths per minute. So normalizing 6 breaths per minute would be key. So there's my first rabbit hole. There's so much power in that. I think with the breath, again, totally free. Getting out into nature, free. Getting your shoes off, standing on the grass, free. Getting really bright natural light in your eyes in the morning, it's free. But again, freeing because it removes the I guess it's like a modern day mismatch malaise that we're suffering from, because the 95% of our existence was that. When we soon see we remove, the further away we get from that, we see that, that's the sympathetic state that we're finding. And if we're spending 95% of our time indoors again, then the answers are where I would say we've had 95% of our existence. That's where we start needing to shine a light on. And for those that have to spend 95% of their time indoors, I get it. But it's then start to view that environment as how can I upgrade it to enable that space to be more growth promoting, which brings me around to a question here, is like, how do you stay consistent with your practice? How do you stay consistent with your practice? Bringing it back to breath again, because the breath enables me to be really consistent in everything I'm doing. If I'm upregulated, and I have stress coming in, I'm somehow making poor decisions. The way I view it is stress and fear lead to poor choices. That's the way I view it now. Or that's what led me, let's say, to make poor choices, which has led me to then observe that's what happens if I'm upregulated. It's kind of the poor choices that tend to drop in if I'm not being consistent in the practices that enable me to be downregulated, and which again are largely free. You don't have to pay for that stuff. And we're living in a world where we need more information. We would seem we're huge consumers, aren't we? Yet strip it all back and go and stand naked in the woodland, and you'll probably feel, once you get past the I'm naked in the woodland, and you start breathing from that whole spiritual skin of yours and absorbing from every sense, you'll soon get a sense of what it is to feel human again, you know? That's how I stay consistent. I go naked in the woods and I stand there barefooted. No, it's again, the more aligned I am with the breath, I would say, and the grounding influences of being barefoot out in nature, the better my handle is with I have a handle on being consistent. And then the more consistent those practices become, then it just becomes one thing. That's how it evolves for me. And there's been lots of questions like that. Like, how do you stay consistent? Then what's your morning routine? And my morning routine changes somewhat, and it's changed again recently. Like over the winter, I felt very much like I'd gone into proper hibernation, and I found that, like, because of the darker morning, it required a slower easing in. I'd sit and I'd meditate, and I'd go through some mobility work. Whereas now it's like super bright in the morning, and I've got this huge amount of energy in me, and I get out. I'm straight away out in the garden. I've started getting 10 muscle ups done before the house wakes up. So it's like muscle up before the house wakes up. And I've started that. And that's a great one for a bit of release for me. Usually involves a bit of cold. I love a bit of a cold splash of water in the morning. And will involve a bit of breath and a bit of a play with the kids. And I also love making breakfast for them now. So I kind of get that going. It's a much easier time of year for me, this. I find that to get really on it early. And I guess that's like, we talk about, what is it? Eating with the seasons. There you go. So we could say, like, for me, that feels like there's a morning routine for the seasons. Like, even my movement and mobility feels like I move with the seasons. I sleep with the seasons in a way. It's brighter in the evening, brighter in the morning. And yet we have this evolutionary circadian rhythm, or this we're equatorial apes, right? So we still have this hormonal cycle that works within light. But there is still this, I can get so much more done in the evening now. So I feel like I can work with that energy. And so that enables me to get, I guess, deeper connections into practice, whether that's a parenting, being a papa, or whether that's being a husband and a partner practice, because they're all practices. And I think when we become divorced and thinking that we have to evolve and grow within those relationships, then we get stagnation, right? So it's remembering that, I guess, as the seasons, what do they highlight? Well, there's growth, right? And there's moments to push and pause and flow and even stagnate, one might think. There's that. So I feel that that's for me it feels very much governed by seasonal kind of experience. That here we go, right? We're going to roll another one out, because I definitely felt like I went and waffled on a bit to the end there. So what's your I'm running an ultra, any advice? don't do it. No, I'm kidding. Depends where you're at. Okay, so I had this recently I have an online community, and one of the guys has just completed a 50K, and we unpacked on the call. I hold like movement sessions in there and breath work, and there's a couple of running tutorials in there and some technical stuff around running. But we unpacked on this call was the foundational movements. So your complex movements, so that could be like walking, or in this case for him, running. And to get back to your question, which is about ultra, any advice? Your complex movement is only as good as your foundational movements. So we went through a whole program on the ground of movements that will help the sophistication of that more complex movement. So which help understanding your grounding of your feet, the loading points of your feet, understanding ankle mobility, knee mobility, and ultimately your posture, because if your posture's out when you're running, it can create all kinds of effects, or muscular tension or niggles or even injury, which ultimately are nature's way of punishing us for a bad skill, I would say, those niggles and injuries, same as some illnesses, we could call that, right? So yeah, for on that call, it was very much about, let's really hone in on the resting positions and the ground sitting positions, because they are the more complex patterns for standing, which then relates to walking and then relates to running. Also, we brought in, of course, is things like the nasal breathing that we've already discussed, like get your breath back to nasal breathing if you haven't done already. I know there's a lot out there at the moment, so you might already be there. What can help with that is to nasal breathe outside of running, so it becomes a foundation of the more complex thing, which would be to nasal breathe when running, right? So can you nasal breathe when you're walking? Can you nasal breathe throughout your day? Which brings it right back to the beginning of the conversation, is to slow the breath. Think of it chapters through the day rather than bookending the day with breath. Widening the apertures to be able to breathe. So the good news is that your the nasal passages are malleable and you can condition them. So great practice if you're seeing this right now, will be easier, but I'll try and do my best to voice it for those that are maybe not going to see this, is you take your bottom teeth and you place your bottom teeth over your top lip, and you place your bottom lip over your top lip. So it's a rather handsome face, right? I'm going to do this right now. And when I do that, it automatically flares my nostrils. So it creates wider apertures to be able to then breathe. So it will be a much more, rather than it can be and we can get a much, much deeper air intake in. I would also advise like being softer and gentler with that breath. So it's not like this when we're running. It's much calmer, because we want to get to that, especially when we're talking about ultra distances and longer distances. We want to be much calmer within that run, not so upregulated, because you'll just burn all your stores off. And then when we're upregulated, your survival part of your brain will try and tell you all kinds of stories to get you to stop, because it's in a survival state, right? So the calmer you can be, the more you can still the mind, and the more you'll have a handle on the internal dialogue that will be dropping in. It's very rare that you're going to an ultra of great distance that you won't have that internal dialogue of, I don't want to burn too much fuel and I don't want to get injured kicking in. So that's in there. And that also brings us back to that conversation about the complexity of running and the foundations. So if you were to squat, for instance, right now, your weight on your feet and the soles of your feet is still the same body weight. It's 1 times body weight. And then when you stand up, it's still the same weight. And when you walk, it's the same weight. So it's all one times your weight that you're experiencing through the same base of support. When you sit down, you no longer experience that full body weight in your feet, you experience it elsewhere. And then when you come to stand up, it feels like, to your survival part of your brain, which is trying to conserve energy and minimize the risk of injury, it's an extreme to be standing up. Whereas if you're ground sitting and squatting in particular, really specific to squatting, when you stand up, there's no difference in the weight. It's less extreme. So big advice I give to people is to remain on 2 feet. Like if you're thinking about running like something which might take you 12 hours, can you firstly stand for 12 hours or be in a squat for 12 hours within a day? Because that's an endurance event alone. And some of the standing desk massive might be able to speak to that. I'm going to give you an example of this, right? So taken to an extreme or viewing it differently. I held a men's retreat. How many years ago? Let's have a look. So nine years ago at 42 acres, which is in Somerset. And on that men's retreat, I started it with a big fire, massive fire. And with the fire, I had the guys, we ran and then we walked and then we turned into a low walk and then we turned into low gait and then we turned it into crawling patterns. And so I took them through this kind of, it's like an evolutionary process, right? Rewinding that process. And then I voiced, right, we're not standing now. So we're not standing. It was like 24 hours, no standing. So to get anywhere meant either low gait walking or crawling, or to rest would be on the ground or squatting. And it was so powerful. It was so powerful to witness this kind of survival part of our brain, because we were finding the most efficient ways of doing things. Like we'd form a queue like within our squats or in our low gaits to pass plates to get them into the kitchen, to get from one place to another, which again, finding the most efficient form of crawling. But the difference was your survival part of that brain was screaming for you to stand up because of the chemical metabolic cost it was to walk around in low gait or crawling. Whereas when you sit down all day and you stand up, that survival part of your brain is screaming for you to sit down again because of the chemical metabolic cost. It's like the complete flip of it. And we went through then, I took the guys through back around the fire that we would crawl, then we'd low gait, then we'd walk, and then we'd turn into running. It was almost like, oh my God, what freedom it was to be able to run again. And so that's something to speak to, like how convenient and comfortable our lives get, the more inconvenient and uncomfortable things get. Does that make sense? So if I sit down all day, it's inconvenient to stand up and it's uncomfortable to stand up. So if you're running an ultra, you have to be looking for discomfort and inconvenience, because otherwise, if we're at 95% of our time indoors sitting and we're considering running an ultra, that's a huge extreme. So I would squat before you stand before you walk before you run, and stretch the time of which you're doing all of those to overlap into what running is, and then bring other modalities in like breath and consider nutrition and stuff like that. Okay. I think that's there, right? Simon's nodding. So I've definitely answered that. What does your day look like? I feel like I've kind of covered that, right? In a way. No. Okay, let's unpack it a little more. So my morning, again, morning routines with the season at the moment, it's very much like waking 5:30, no alarm because it's bright enough, I feel, to stir me. I then do some articulations of my joints lying in the bed. I'm in my 50th year. I feel like I need to be doing that. So I kind of get just a little articulations in my joints first, and then off I go. I tend to run down the stairs. That's something that I've instilled, is to not kind of ooh downstairs. I very much just go boom and get down them. And it helps me think about timing and rhythm and balance and stuff like that. And I think it's very important, rather than a hold the rail for safety, which again divorces us from so much. So I like to run down the stairs. I'm then into the water and salt, Celtic sea salts in the morning, and a good stir, and I have that. And then I'm outside in the bright blue, and I'll start with my feet barefoot on the ground, and I do some pulsing, like so you just simply soften your knees, soften your ankles, soften your hips, relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, almost like a gormless face, like your jaw's that relaxed, and little pulses. And those pulses again just increase the intensity of them as I go, so it's not straight in. And then I build a tempo breath with it, like so I'm already breathing, that comes in, an awareness of breath. And I'll do like 100 cycles of breath, I guess. And then I'll venture into the house again. I'll do a bit of mobility. And then I'm into this 10 kind of muscle up. So when I'm in here, I have some tape to tape my wrists, because I feel I'm being so consistent with it that, yeah, I've got a few scars on my wrists at the moment from the gymnastic rings. So I'm taping at the moment, like gymnastic tape around my wrists. And I'll get 10 of those in, and I've started playing with forward rolls. I quite like to be playful in what I do, and so it feels less like exercise. So I start putting forward rolls and backward rolls, which is also a really lovely state to get into, because, again, part of maturing is to not to become divorced from being playful. Like, when did adulthood get so serious? What's the saying? We don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing, right? So for me, I do enter things with a much more playful state, and gymnastic rings have become that. It's a really nice practice. And I'm about to launch a muscle up program through my online platform. So I'll give you a shout out to that when it comes. But that's going to be like a simple 10-step to get your muscle up. And I love the muscle up. There's so much in it, like so much of a practice, different kind of grip, different articulations of joints. There's pushing, there's pulling. And everyone asks, I always get hit with, how do you keep your abs like, and things like the muscle ups are great. Like, you can really feel the recruitment of your abs in there. And as I say, great pushing and pulling. So if you're into your t-shirt muscles, muscle ups are great for that, but they're incredibly functional and incredibly playful. So I'd recommend getting on the muscle up. So that's generally my start. And then it depends if I want to get in the cold tub or not. Usually I like either a cold shower or get in the cold tub. And then the Riddle kids start to wake up. And that's when my day really starts, because that brings so much more joy and playfulness in. And we're an unschooling family, so that means it's not like we pack our kids off for the day and then meet up with them a bit later. We're like fully in it, like the unit. And so my day will be spent around the kids, which also means the consistency. I have to be kind of boundaries and disciplined and consistent. Otherwise, yeah, shit just wouldn't get done. So we communicate that there's a room for almost working, and it's like when that door's closed, that's when we're working. Then outside of that, and if I'm really on it, and I've been speaking to this recently with some friends of mine who they reduced their working week, kind of post lockdown COVID time. They went into working from home, then they went back into the office, but they managed to maintain like a 4-day work week. So what they realized in the first part, I'm going to speak to this, in the first part of lockdown, when it was all new and we were at home and they had the discipline, the consistency to stay in that, they were smashing stuff out in like such a short window of time. It just highlighted for them what they voiced was how much they were dicking around in the office, really. Exactly their words, by the way, not mine. But at home, suddenly, because they valued their time, how much time they could have, they didn't have an hour on each end commuting, so they gained that. And they felt they could get there. So they reduced their working week down to 4 days. And then it's how disciplined and consistent we are, gaining that extra day. What does that turn into? And so part of that getting up super early, the 5:30, is I get a lot of my stuff done really before the house wakes up. So it's already in place, and then I'm not chasing it later or feeling the guilt, for not getting it done, which then means I'm showing up as a parent, and I'm also showing up in the experiences outside of that. Because if I haven't dealt with this properly, I'm carrying it over here. And if I haven't dealt with that, I'm bringing it into my parenting. So that's largely what a day kind of looks like all my morning looks like. Brekkie for the kids. I'm quite consistent with that. I like to kind of have an experience with them, and it might mean that they're making brekkie with me. Habit of getting outside with that. And then I'll have calls set up. So there'll be calls set up, or I have an online community, so I spend time with them. And then I do stuff like this, right, where we're behind a mic, or I've just come off a meeting, and that's kind of the flavor. And then the evenings are very much downtime, family time. I'm really. It's not that exciting, if I'm honest. If I'm truthful, it's not that exciting, my daily routine. It's very much family orientated. What you kind of see on socials is kind of, that's what we do. It's not like, I'm on socials now, I better perform this. And I spoke to that recently. We see like these captures, I guess, in amongst the day, and how honest are those captures throughout the day, and how much are we really willing to speak to and shine or light on. And just recently, I had a tough time. I had some guys there in the morning. We did a sauna together, and one of them was unpacking some difficulty he was going through. And in a way, I felt like I'd almost undermined the feeling or the communication by voicing, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. And I feel the longer you get in the tooth, the more you realize that it too shall pass. And the longer you get in the tooth, the less time then you spend in those down moments, because it's only a matter of time. And you also pick up more modalities and understandings of how to get yourself out of that frame of mind. Well, I feel I've learned that in time. But it's happening for you, not to you, was voiced to this guy as well, So after that, I then sat in Tony, I don't think you really heard him, and you're undermining something by just immediately going in with this too shall pass. It's reassuring, but actually we do also need to sit in those feelings and those sensations. Otherwise we're putting a lid on it with the it too shall pass. So I had that recently, and it came up for me, and then it started to highlight that we were going through something ourselves. We're in a bit of a transitional phase at the moment, and something dropped in for me, and suddenly I found myself really in process. I was working through the process, and I started to go into, oh man, you've been here before. It's okay. This too shall pass. I was like, no. I need to sit in this. And what the beauty of it was, is it was again shining the perfect light on it, and I voiced it over socials in real time as it's happening. So to actually voice, well, I'm going through this right now, and this is what I'm dealing with, and I'm in the cave right now, and I'm experiencing this. And it's very rare we see that. it's very rare we hear that. We really, it's become such a space where we're just showing the best parts of our day and the best parts of our lives, and I feel for people actually observing that and seeing that, because if you're having a really shit time and all you see all over socials that you might be using as a pacifier to help you deal with a shit time you're having because you're suffering, we need pacifiers, and all you're observing is these amazing lifestyles, how much more shit does that make you feel? Whereas if someone actually we're all just went, you know, I'm having a shit time right now, I've got this going on. But then the next however long passes, you know, I've turned that around. This is what I did. I worked through some breath and I got out into nature and I did a walk and I hugged my family and I went to bed at a certain time and I didn't stay up scrolling and trolling. And guess what? I feel so much better from that, you know? So, that's a tangent. Yeah. So that's what a day sometimes looks like. Sometimes I'm having a shit time of it. Sometimes it's amazing. But to appreciate the amazing times, I also have to have pretty shit times, because it can't be amazing all the time, because nothing would be amazing, right? It would all just be the same thing, which, you know, I think it would be pretty exhausting. It's a bit like, you know, a bit like sex, right? You can't have an orgasm the whole time, you know? What would be beyond that, you know? Anyway, so there is that. That's sometimes what a day looks. Sometimes a day looks like, I know I'm not feeling that great right now, but it does shine a light then in what's out right now, what's out of balance. And I do really, what I started the conversation with, I do go to all the free stuff first, and it's like, what's free right now? Nature, breath, a dip in the sea, a hug from my family, you know, and I think that the sleep piece is really, really important within that, which there is a question about sleep. So well, it's not actually a question about sleep. It's about what's with the amber glasses. So I can get to that now. What's with the amber glasses? The NatLifePod is a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. This is also what underpins our online community, the NatLife Tribe. The NatLife Tribe is a growing health and natural lifestyle community where we offer weekly natural movement sessions, breathwork sessions, and hold a check-in safe space for the community to share, connect, and raise a hand if help is needed. This is a great space to embody the practices that we often speak to on the NatLifePod. Full details on how to join the NatLife Tribe are in the show notes. I hope to see you moving, breathing, and sharing in there real soon. I like them. They're aviators, and I think they're pretty gangster. No, I've been wearing amber glasses for many, many years now. I think way back, I think I was listening to, who was it? Daniel Vitalis, and he had a podcast called Rewild Yourself way back in the day. It's now something else. I think it's called Survival now, something along those lines. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant platform. Highly advise looking at that. And it was the first podcast I'd heard, and it was with someone speaking to amber glasses, but back then they were like welding glasses. You'd like wear these massive kind of amber shades, but it just made sense. So speaking to the kind of equatorial apes that we are, we have like this 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. is like our catabolic phase where we're kind of breaking shit down, and then we have an anabolic phase where we're rebuilding, like replenishing. Imagine that, like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then he was then speaking, of course, to melatonin, and then looking at lighting, the effects of lighting. So way back in the early days of it, and it just made a lot of sense. And so I started to then go down the rabbit hole of it, and 6 years ago now, I guess, I started writing my own book, and I did a huge chapter on, well, it was a huge chapter before going into edit. So it was like 28,000 words that I dropped on the editors, and it got whittled down to 8,000 words. But it was really unpacking, not sleep. It was unpacking the sleep habitat, the habits within the habitat, because we often go, oh, yeah, you need 8 hours. And there was this huge myth around 8 hours that we should all be getting 8 hours. And if you weren't, then you'd be suffering from these sleep deprived illnesses, or this is what you'd be experiencing. There's ties to diabetes and obesity, cancer even. And there was this huge kind of suggestion that it was down to not receiving 8 hours. And I started to approach that in a different way and thinking, well, what does that actually look like in nature? You know, are we really receiving this from not sleeping 8 hours, or is it something within the environment of which we're sleeping? And then, yeah, I've unpacked that in the book quite in some depth. But again, further in the chapter that I submitted, and when we look to indigenous cultures, again, no one is sleeping for 8 hours. There is this 5.7 to 6.5 hours, right? Is the length of sleep, duration of sleep in independent tribes in different geographic locations. But they just don't have access to the light bulb. And so when you start to unpack that, you see that, well, if I turn a light bulb on at when the sun's gone down and the hue of light have changed, because it's not like at sunset immediately we're in darkness, there's a hue of light there, right? But when we do get to darkness, if you were to switch the light on, there's a very sophisticated part of the brain known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And when the light goes on, it switches melatonin, or the release of melatonin, off. And when the light would be off, as in signal, the suprachiasmatic nucleus picks up on it's dark, it's melatonin release on. It's that simple, right? Light on, light off, light on, light off. And what happens is when that light is on in the evening, it then suppresses this release of melatonin. And guess what? Melatonin is what, when you unpack it, you see that it's this miracle molecule, in a sense that it has influences on all those systems we're led to believe are a result of not getting 8 hours sleep. And so it's really the light exposure, which is the habitat again. So is it better to get 5.5 hours sleep in a natural setting, or 8 hours sleep in an unnatural habitat? Of course, it's going to be the more natural environment, because those indigenous cultures that that have been discussed in the anthropological study from 3 different geographic locations demonstrate the same sleep patterns, yet they don't have, and they're not sleeping for 8 hours, they don't have the same conditions that are being associated with not reaching 8 hours sleep. So it's, the thing that's different is what? There's lighting difference, there's air quality difference, there's firelight, which is a difference, right? So there's firelight within that environment. So there's factors that can be changed within an everyday environment. And one of the easiest things you could possibly do is wear amber glasses. There you go, got to it. So the amber glasses help then mitigate the influence of the blue and green spectrums of light that signal the suprachiasmatic nucleus to turn off the release of melatonin. That's what they're doing. It returns you to a hue of a frequency, or you receive the light through the eye, which would mimic then the equivalent to, say, firelight. So in, again, those indigenous cultures who are around the fire, that's the only light they have. And so the amber glasses enable that. They block out the blue and green spectrums of night again. But it's not just about lighting. There is an influence of temperature. Temperature is shown also to affect sleep. So you want a slight dropping of temperature in the evening. And things that I do is this is a huge privilege I'm going to speak to now. I have a sauna at home, right? It's a huge privilege. But we do tend to do sauna at night because, again, we get like this picking up of temperature, and then when you come out of that, then there's a dropping off of temperature. So we get then a drop in temperature, which helps assist in sleep as well. Other things outside of amber glass would be to actually change a light bulb. So the same influence can happen within your home. We have now, I think they're by Blue Block bulbs, I want to say. We can put it in the show notes, right? And I put a tag in. I put a code in there or something like that. We'll be able to find something for you. And they're brilliant. So you just put them in as standard bayonets or screw-ins, and you don't need a remote control or anything. You just turn the light on. It will either be really bright light, which is that powerful light that we want early in the day, but we're really hypersensitive to in the evening. And then if you turn it off and turn it on again, the light bulb turns to amber. So it removes then the blue and green spectrums. So then you don't necessarily need the glasses, unless you have cool aviators like mine. You still want to wear them in the evening. But what it can't do is it can't change the screen perhaps in your hand, right? So you would need amber glasses for that. There are ways of getting like an amber wash on your phone, but there's other factors at play there, which are going to be things like dopamine, and that's not so conducive with that sleep if you're trolling and scrolling and staring at your screen. Another thing with the screen and getting into what would be the habit within the habitat that you want to improve your sleep habit, or the habits outside of it. So if you're staring at your screen, it creates what's called like a hypervisual state. So yes, you can wear amber glasses that will help mitigate the blue and green spectrums of light that won't then signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus to turn off the release of melatonin. But with that hypervisual state, you're then switching or changing gear to what is that fight and flight sympathetic nervous system. So you might have gone and done all the amazing work. Oh, you know what, these practices are free. I'm going to go out in nature and it will lower my heart rate and blood pressure. I'm going to do my breath work because it will lower my heart rate and blood pressure. But what I'm now going to do is stare at my screen and absorb information that perhaps is from a world of competition, scarcity, or it's thriller or suspense, and all of that stuff really before you go to sleep is going to lead to upregulation. So you're going to end up in a fight and flight kind of sympathetic state. So keys with devices is get it out of the bedrooming experience. Don't include it in there in the first place. That would be a great thing to do. Actually put a boundary in, like in the bedroom. The bedroom is for certain things, right? You know, and maybe the mobile phone isn't in there. Try get familiar with that. And so you're not going into that hypervisual state. If it's in the daytime, it still encourages that. So if you're finding yourself quite anxious and you get triggered perhaps easily, get the device away from you for moments and start to think about opening up your visual field. And you can do that simply by doing stuff like this, and you can start to expand that view. What would be the best environment for that? When it actually works out, it's nature again, because we just open up that peripheral view. Yeah. When is it necessary to be much more in this state? Will it be when I'm foraging or something where I might be much more in tune with the environment? But yeah, getting that device out of the bedroom. So it's not just about the amber glasses, it's the person behind those amber glasses that also we need to consider. So I'm gonna well, we'll see. I'm thinking one more. There's also another one here which I quite like. I like the what's next. Yeah, what's next? But this is okay. So this is the penultimate one, right? I want to sign up to the 100 Human Experience, but I'm nervous. I'm holding the 100 Human Experience, and I'm nervous. Yeah, I hear you, and you know, I speak to this. How can I first? I guess it's a little bit more clarity in what you're nervous about helps, but I can speak to this from someone that messaged recently about coming on their own and they felt they were really nervous. And something I spoke to on the call earlier as well, because we're going to be taking like 100 people into a sweat lodge, and it was about the communication and people feeling safe. And the 100 human experience from the get-go, from the very opening, is about connection, human connection. On paper, it looks like all the practices, like there's breath and there's cold immersion and there's sweat lodges and there's movement and there's play and there's cacao ceremonies and there's voice awakening. I could reel it off all day. But actually, what that event is about human connection and community and being seen and being held. All those things that are just as important, probably actually, again, going back to that 95% of our existence, I would say that some of the symptoms we have today are because of the lack of that human connection that's felt, that feeling of being connected to something outside of ourselves, an opportunity to be seen and heard and held, all of that. I think maybe that's, again, that's cause level stuff, right? And we're seeing the symptoms of that being divorced from that, or that being removed for however reason that is that we face today in the modern mismatch malaise, right? So that I can speak to. If that's what it is to be nervous, if you're coming on your own. I recently put a reel up and someone spoke to that. They had the same, they were meant to be going with someone. They were meant to have a friend attend with them, and their friend pulled out and they came on their own. And she just went, oh my God, she just wasn't expecting it like that. Like, from the moment we opened, 100 people in a circle, and I went and literally, unless you're nervous about me hugging you, I just went and hugged everyone, and that's it, and just said you're loved, right? And it just, again, brought everyone in, and then I worked through playful kind of approaches in the opening that pulls everyone together from the moment we start, and we stay together, and that's what the 100 human is for me. We pride ourselves. We pride ourselves on that. It's about bringing people together and connecting them. And yes, the experiences are great, and it does deepen that, I guess, but it's also the moments in amongst or between the actual practices where deeper connections are made. We've had, I think we're on our third baby now. I think we've had like couples meeting at the 100 human experience. I think I've just, because I get sent stuff like this, by the way, we're pregnant, and they met at the 100 human experience, and we've had a wedding, 2 weddings, and we've had one baby already, and then there's one I've just been sent the, what are they, 3D scans now, 4D scans, whatever they are, the scan of the baby, like the 100 human babies. That's amazing, right? So there's that. So there's that. If you're nervous about the practices, then we all work together, and it's so safe and it's so held, and there's amazing facilitators. Yeah. And I think it's, in a way, it's good to have a little of that. I think, unless, again, we take ourselves out of the everyday and we do play with those edges of discomfort, then in theory we are stagnating, right? We are in a position of stagnating, which is great at times, but I think we also need to, definitely play with those edges. And when we do step out of the everyday, that's when I think we find something new to perhaps grow. If we step outside what can be the limiting behaviors and beliefs, we grow. So, if it's nervous about coming on your own, I think we've covered that. If you're nervous about the practices, then they're really, really, you're going to be held, and they're ultra safe. And it's something, again, we pride ourselves on that. And maybe sit in what it is you're nervous about and message me, because you could get the message in my DMs earlier. So message me what it is specifically you're nervous about, and maybe I can answer that. So it's more individual specific for you. Okay, what's next? So this is it's a tough one. What's next? Because it's quite vague in a way, right? As to what's next. What's next is my 50th year, and what that brings up for me, is quite a big thing, right? Because 30s are done, 40s are almost done, and then it's like, there's a grieving almost within those years, isn't there? When we go into our 40s, we're grieving our 30s. So I guess that's coming. I guess redefining what 50s are, that feels like could be what's next there in that communication. What's possible for someone? What could we be doing, And I guess demonstrating, for those that can't, perhaps, is part of that, I have that whole, it's a privilege to walk for those that can't, it's a privilege to run for those that can't, it's a privilege to be alive, to live for those that can't. And I guess it's a privilege to really challenge the 50s. That's a privilege, right? To be able to really stretch, play with the edges of discomfort, and keep growing and keep evolving. That's what's next. It's always something new, right? So there's always a new and always a next. But I think, for me, it'd be the 50s. It will be this. That feels how I can answer that for now. It's like refining, redefining. And then that could answer some of the, I guess, questions of it. Is that what's the next endurance event? What's the next event you're holding? Yeah, I guess it'll be really sitting back and having a moment of to tune into. Yeah, I'm actually really content, I guess. So I don't feel like there's a striving there for endurance right now. I don't feel like I don't feel like it doesn't feel like a need right now. I feel pretty content where I am, and I have an amazing family, and I have an amazing life. And if something pops up and it looks like it's playful, I guess, then I'll go and have a crack at it. But at the moment, I don't. I don't. So then, I guess the question is that why the endurance events in the past, And something, I worked with a woman called Catherine. We did a pod with her, actually. And she worked on me on the Man March for Movember. And something that dropped in that call was, stop running. And then I've been sitting in that for quite some time, and there was almost a, what are you running from? And what is it you're running into even? And I guess when you feel more and more content, perhaps you don't need to run away, right? You're much more pinned to the spot you're in. There we go. So that's where I'm at. Content. It's a great place to be. It feels good. And the fact I'm, again, entering into my 50th year, feeling content, it's quite something. It's quite something. The reason it's quite something is I've coached a lot of people over time, and met a lot of people in that midlife point when they're definitely not content, feel like they don't have purpose, feeling like almost like, what now? I thought I'd have it all sorted, as if I'd have all the answers. it was like a completion or something. Like you get to this age and it's like, I've completed that now. I know everything. I've had this massive download from wherever that came from, and I know everything. But I think content is knowing that you're not going to know everything, and there's an acceptance which is with that, right? An acceptance for who you are, where you are, and knowing that, I guess, the day that you're pushing up daisies is when you're going to stop learning, you know? Yeah, that's it. And for that is to keep learning. And even if that means you could be approaching the same thing, right? I could go over there and pick something up from the shelf and bring it back to this same position. But if I have more of a beginner's mind, then that's a new book I'm picking up, and it's a new walk to the bookshelf. So then you're always learning, you know? And it helps, I guess, being a papa to 4 kids who are all just the most beautiful beings, and they're of all ages. So like 14, 12, 8 now for Tallulah. She turned 8 on the 10th, which is also the anniversary of this podcast. And Bowman's 4. And Katerina was in London recently, and I had the kids for 3 days. And I took them out on this coastal walk, and it's pretty gnarly. It's like really hilly and rocky, and then you've got trail, and then it's down a load of huge granite steps that for a Bowman's legs or a Tallulah legs, you have to jump down them, or you have to do gigantic steps to get up them. So it's like an endurance event for them. But they've done that walk like a number of times. It's not new, but to go with them, it's definitely new. Like they enter it with such a beginner's mind, and it's staying in that. That's what I've enables me to be more content again, I guess, is that you're removing, I guess, the expectations because it's new now and you haven't done it before. And I haven't done 50 before, so it's all new. Anyway, that's me. With love to you. It's all new. Much love. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you feel drawn to do so, then please subscribe to the show, leave a review, and don't forget to share. Sharing is caring. It really helps me to help others. If you're drawn to immersing yourself in any of the NatLife experiences or see yourself as a NatLife coach, head to tonyriddle.com for details of how to immerse yourself in the community. You can follow my adventures on Instagram at The Natural Lifestylist. Big shout out to Simon from We Are the Clarks for producing, filming, editing. Much love.